Good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Licensing Committee meeting of the 15th of September 2020. I'm Councillor Michael Jones. I'm the chair of the Licensing Committee. The agenda for this meeting is available on the Council's website. There are no in-person public speaking rights at this virtual committee. However, members of the public have the opportunity to submit written questions in advance of the meeting. Any questions have been published in a supplementary agenda and will be read to the committee by the Democratic Services Officer. Can I ask the officers supporting the meeting to introduce themselves, giving their name and job title?
I'm Heather Girling, I'm the Democratic Services Officer.
I'm Jess Tamplin, Democratic Services Support Officer.
I'm Kate Wilson, Head of Community Services.
Good evening, I'm Corinne Plimpson. I'm the Team Leader for Health Safety.
Hello.
Thing.
I don't know where they are.
Yeah, welcome Chris. Can you mute yourself,
I
please?
can't hear anything.
Hello, I'm Astrid Williams from
The
Legal
speakers
Services.
aren't working. Why aren't they working? Hello.
Hello, Chris. Can you hear us? Clearly not. Mute yourself, Chris. Can you lip read? Mute yourself. Okay. Right. Before I invite members of the committee to confirm their attendance, can I ask that they please ensure their mobile phones are switched off or on silent, their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and that they will not be disturbed during the meeting. Committee members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking, and their cameras turned off unless speaking or requesting to speak.
Hello.
Thank you. Right, item 1 is apologies for absence. Hello. Okay, so item 1 is apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence?
We've received apologies from Councillor Brenda Smith.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies? No, I'll take that as no. Items 2 and 3 are the disclosures of interest and minutes. We will now be taking introductions with items 2 and 3. Please can I ask committee members, when called upon, to confirm the ward they represent, if they have any declarations of interest to make, and if they agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on 20th of January 2020.
Okay, we will start with Councillor Ayling, please. Can you please put your camera on, please, Councillor Ayling?
Hello, I'm Councillor Ayling. I'm the ward member for Bewbush and Broadfield North. Is that all you need?
Can you also mention your declarations of interest and if you agree the minutes of the last meeting, please?
I agree the minutes of the last meeting and I have no declaration of interest.
Okay, lovely.
Thank
And next is going to be Brenda Burgess.
Hello, I'm Brenda Burgess, councillor for Three Bridges with the Town Centre.
I've got no speakers.
And Chris, okay. And I do have an special interest declare. I'm a member of West Sussex County Council. Okay, is that okay? Will that do? Thank you.
Councillor Duncan Crowe.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan Crowe, representing Furness Green. I have, well, maybe I will do it just in case. Agenda item 5, I declare personal non-prejudicial interest as a member of West Sussex County Council. I cannot approve the minutes of the last meeting on the 20th of January because I was not a member of the committee then, and I see it's been 9 months since we've last had a meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Guidra.
Thank you. This is Councillor Francis Guidra. I am councillor for Tilgate. I have no declarations and I cannot approve the meeting.
Hello.
Can Mr.
Yeah, I
Mr.
can't
Chair,
get my speakers to
Mr.
work.
Chair,
Speakers are on, mate, so can you not say anything?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Francis, what can I do? Shall I? Francis?
Michael, Councillor Jones, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Guidra.
Thank you very much. Can I just make the suggestion? It seems very unfair on Councillor Mullins with the background and everything showing. Is it worth pausing the meeting so that he can get his IT tech sorted?
I was initially looking to try and sort something out, Councillor Guidra.
This will be on the record, the whole meeting, won't it? And it will be recorded for posterity. And I think it's unfair.
Well, bear with us.
Sure.
I think in the meantime, while we're sorting out Councillor Mullins' issues, if we could just continue for
yes, yeah, of course. Well, I have no declarations, and I can't approve the minutes as I wasn't at the last meeting, so that's that.
Thank you. Can we move on to Councillor Ginny Hart, please?
Yeah, hello, Councillor Julie Hart representing Ifield and Ifield West. I've got no declarations and I approve the minutes of the January meeting.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Kim Jagger from Maidenbower. I've no declarations of interest, I've not been lobbied, and I agree the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johans.
Councillor Gurinder Johns representing Northgate and West Green. I have no declarations of interest and I cannot approve the minutes of the last meeting as I was not a member of the committee at that point.
Councillor Jones.
I'm Councillor Michael Jones. I am ward representative for Bewbush Ward. I have no declarations of interest to make. And I was present, and I do agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on the 20th of January 2020.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, please.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kevin McCarthy. I'm the Ward Councillor for Pound Hill North and Forge Wood. I've got no declarations of interest, and I was at the meeting in January, on January the 20th, and I agree that the minutes are an accurate reflection of that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miller-Smith, please.
Thank you. Councillor Jennifer Millar-Smith, Councillor for Maidenbower Ward, and I approve the minutes of the last meeting, and I have no declarations of interest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Mullins' camera is no longer visible on the stream. I would just add for technical reasons and in response, we did have a discussion regarding the IT and the background, and it was down to the device that was being used for the live events. And there was an issue with viewing the certain background effects, Chair.
Right. Okay. Shall we continue going through the well? Hopefully, Councillor Mullins can resolve his technical. Oh, well, that was the final councillor. If he present, if he joins us later, I will ask him to make the necessary points on these items.
Chair, it's Brenda Burgess here. Sorry to jump in. I didn't say anything about the minutes because it doesn't look as though I was at last meeting. Can't see my name on the sheet, so I'm assuming I wasn't there. Don't ask me to remember as far back as January, but I do have a couple of questions about the minutes. So do I send those privately to Kareem or whoever about the minutes, or do I ask here?
I think that in terms of the minutes, This would be on any accuracy.
Right.
The
No,
accuracy of
I'm
the
not.
minutes rather than
It,
matters arising.
I think I can't say.
So
It was just a couple of questions that about the content of the minutes. You know, things how they're going. But can I raise that later then?
I think. I mean, if they were relevant to the subject matter of the presentation at item 5, yes. If not, then it would probably be best if you took it offline with.
Would that be okay to do that? I'll do that. Is
yes,
that okay?
That's fine.
That's
yeah,
fine.
that's
Okay,
fine.
thank you.
Right. Item 4 is public questions in line with the council's constitution. Any questions from members of the public must have been received at least 2 days before the date of the meeting. Are there any questions for the committee?
We haven't received any questions from members of the public, Chair. And could I also just confirm that Councillor Brenda Burgess was not at the committee meeting of the 20th of January, just for record purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's memory time, you see, my age. I do get forgetful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. So we come to the main item 5, environmental health and licensing update. I always personally feel that part of our work as the licensing committee and as the councillors who are the ones who specialise in this area within the council, this is an important thing for us to do. So item 5 is an update from the environmental health and licensing team. Committee members are asked to reserve any questions or points for discussion until the end of the presentation. So given that, can I ask the licensing officer, Corinne Plimpton, to please present the update? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the introduction, Chair. The purpose of the session today is to update you about various matters relating to the licensing committee, COVID-19 and beyond. You'll have had an introduction from Kate Wilson, who's the head of community services, and myself as the licensing manager, team leader for health, safety and licensing. I thought it would be helpful to give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover in today's session, and that's in relation to COVID-19 Crawley Borough Council's response as a council, the track and trace system, the support, education and compliance surrounding that environmental health and licensing have offered various individuals and businesses, an update in relation to taxi licensing, what's new, what are the challenges ahead, licensing generally, including the Licensing Act, again, what's new and the challenges ahead, and future matters for the committee. And as has been requested, if you could ask me any questions or comments that you might have at the end, I will endeavour to answer those. If I'm not in a position to answer those today, I will come back to you with a response. So in terms of COVID-19 and the Crawley Borough Council's approach, there's been a council-wide response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant effect both locally and nationally. Environmental health and licensing staff initially set up K2, the K2 distribution hub, where we provided food parcels and medical supplies for Crawley's most vulnerable residents. The strategy there was such a success, it was deemed as best practice, and we took on the responsibility of preparing and distributing Sussex-wide parcels on behalf of other boroughs and West Sussex County Council. In conjunction with that and working in partnership, Community Services, part of Crawley Borough Council, managed the Town Hall's Help Hub as a single point of contact for the most vulnerable, where people would ring in and ask for assistance and support. That Help Hub would then triage cases and signpost them to the right sources of support, which could include the K2 Food Hub and supplies therein. And responses according to that were tailored to the individual need. And as you can imagine, as we went into the pandemic and into lockdown, there were lots of calls for demands on that service. And it's fair to say that lots of Crawley Borough Council staff were redeployed to support the functions within both K2 and within the Help Hub based at the Town Hall. But what I would say is that we respond well as a Department of Environmental Health to challenges, infectious disease outbreaks and pandemics of this nature, and it's something that we thrive on. But it really, really was a team effort. I thought it would just be helpful to give you a bit of a quick pictorial image of the different actions that have been undertaken. You may have seen this in other media, but I thought I'd just pick one or two aspects of statistics in relation to the slide that's in front of you. You'll see that 56,900 subscribed to COVID alerts and emails, and they were corresponded with. We had 69 reports of fly tipping, and this is increasing. We're anticipating that's as a result of the amenity tip being closed during lockdown periods for infectivity risk purposes. Lots of people being able to, being not at work or working from home and carrying out DIY, garden and house clearances during lockdown, and several unlicensed traders operating with a view to purportedly legally disposing of that waste and rubbish generated as people had a clear out at home and sort out. We now have a targeted action plan which is jointly operated by Environmental Health and community wardens to target that kind of activity. And another statistic that's quite interesting there for from the purposes of the presentation is that 842 Crawley Borough Council food parcels were distributed to Crawley's most vulnerable residents. And I'm proud to say that we were, as I said, highlighted as best practice, and lots of other authorities used our services or followed the model of distribution and support in the form of the community hub and the distribution hub. The next slide relates to the financial support that's been offered to various businesses and retail settings and hospitality settings. As you'll see, since April 2020, there have been various hospitality and leisure grants paid to 886 businesses. And since June 2020, a further 497,500 paid to 55 businesses through the discretionary grant scheme. Some of the smaller businesses and micro businesses weren't eligible for the business grants available from central government, so that covered that area of work. All businesses and individuals dealt with by Environmental Health and Licensing were signposted sources of help, be it financial support, practical support, or advice and guidance on how to manage their business in relation to COVID-19, both during lockdown and post-lockdown. It is fair to say that there were a significant number of applications for grants which were assessed against a range of criteria, but we have identified some instances of fraudulent claims by individuals purporting to be a particular business or a particular individual when in fact they were not. Environmental Health and Licensing. I thought it would be helpful just to give you a quick overview of what we've been doing as a team in the licensing context, given that we're within the licensing committee today. As I said before, Environmental Health and Licensing are used to working in a high pressure environment. With regard to COVID-19, there was a challenge really, and it's an ongoing challenge in relation to what's regulation as prescribed by the Health Protection Coronavirus Regulations 2020 and associated legislation versus what's guidance. So the regulations are the basis on which we can act in terms of the law, and the guidance is just that. And it's been a particularly challenging time for us as enforcement officers and education officers for businesses, because that guidance is constantly changing, as you'll have seen most recently, where there have been limits placed on the number of people that can be in a group of 6. But that's constantly evolving and changing. So one day we might give one bit of advice and guidance to a business, but then have to retract that and also then look again to see what the latest guidance is from central government. You'll see from the slide that contact has been made with 400 food and licensed premises regarding safe business practice during the pandemic. That's ongoing as businesses evolve and change to adapt to the changing environment. As an organisation, Crawley Borough Council has done lots of information sharing, both nationally, locally, and looked at a best way to target our resources most effectively. We have shared issues with neighbouring authorities, county-wide, borough-wide, to ensure that we've got best practice in place, and we've got partnerships established with Sussex Police, Trading Standards, Public Health England, Legal Services, fraud networks, and we're also part of the county-wide Health Protection Board, specifically dealing with issues surrounding COVID-19, and Kate Wilson and our Deputy Chief Executive and GCOR are participants of that, as well as members of Environmental Health. We have had unfortunately issues with 10 licensed premises, and the action that we've taken relates to opening during lockdown, which resulted in prohibition notices being issued in relation to those individuals operating those businesses. We've also had issues with non-compliance with social distancing and safe systems of work. And by that I mean people not keeping the 2 metres right at the beginning, which has obviously evolved and changed, and also not adhering to safe spacing within venues or in queues, and safe systems of work in terms of not cleansing the area properly, not recording information of attendees to the premises and so on. And some premises also not participating fully or appropriately within the track and trace system that's been established. We have noticed that there's been a significant increase in the number of home caterers across the borough. We had a handful of applications last year, pre-COVID. From January to September now, we've had 77 new home businesses that have sought to establish themselves. That's not including probably the hundreds of inquiries we've had in association with setting up as a new business. And the reason for that really is, I think, individuals looking to diversify, looking to operate from home where perhaps they've lost a business premises or they've lost their job and they're looking to change their future employment. That's been a particular challenge for us in terms of inspecting and offering advice and guidance, often to some very inexperienced individuals. But as an exciting strategy, we have launched a scheme called, a scheme called Keep Crawley COVID-19 Secure in licensed premises. And we are looking to expand that to taxis and other businesses if that's a success. We've taken the concept to the Pub Watch scheme, and that's been taken on and welcomed. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what that means. The Keep Crawley COVID Secure, which we're planning to launch fully next week, is a campaign to raise awareness and to provide assurance to licence holders and customers in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, that firstly staff are properly trained and COVID-19 aware, that the premises has undertaken an appropriate COVID-19 risk assessment specific for that purpose and it's been adhered to, that there's been a robust cleansing and cleaning programme that takes place and is ongoing in the premises, that we will be looking at a track and trace system for every single customer, not just the main party member, as is currently the case from a government guidance point of view, and that there'll be personal protective equipment for staff which will be used in appropriate situations. I'm just going to quickly click on and show you what that scheme poster firstly will look like, and that licensees will be asked to sign up to those terms and conditions as a method of best practice and a set of standards, so that members of the public that are attending can feel reassured that those systems of work are being followed and that the environment, as far as is reasonably practicable, is COVID secure. Okay, so that's the licensed premises agreement, the second document. The one before will be one that will be displayed liberally through licensed premises to let people know that they're subscribed to that scheme. We've also encouraged members of the public to feed back to us where perhaps a premises may sign up to this, but perhaps isn't adhering to the parameters that have been set and that they've signed up to. But as I say, Pub Watch have been quite excited about this opportunity, and it's about working in partnership to get it right, to make sure that our venues are safe, well managed and a pleasure to visit, even in the most challenging times such as a pandemic. Okay. Okay, the next slide covers the system of track and trace. I don't know if many of you have attended licensed premises or premises indeed generally in your day-to-day life since lockdown, and have been required to give your details as part of the track and trace system that's in place as specified by central government, working in conjunction with NHS England and NHS Track and Trace and Public Health England. What we're encouraging our venues to include as part of the track and trace system is the name of the individual concerned, their contact details, that can be an email or a mobile number, and in addition to that, the time at the premises. And I've put that in bold because that's an addition that we're specifying, because it helps us to track that person's movement and also the infection time. The other matter that is required is the retention of details for 21 days for track and trace purposes, and we're trying to educate licensed premises about safekeeping of that information appropriate to GDPR requirements and making sure that's kept confidential. As I've mentioned previously, the government is requiring that the main person in the group's details are taken, not everyone, but there are potential changes to that. There's been suggestion from central government they may be asking for each and every person in attendance to a premises to have their details taken and recorded for track and trace purposes. From the 18th of September, the government will mandate what's needed as part of the track and trace system and which premises need to comply, as data collection is quite patchy at the moment. It's anticipated that licensed premises, pubs, restaurants and so on will form part of those mandatory settings where track and trace and the new parameters will be set. If you've attended a local hostelry, the premises will have to have had a site-specific COVID-19 risk assessment. That's in addition to their standard one about the mechanisms they're putting in place to ensure that the premises is following social distancing, putting measures in place to protect both staff and customers, cleansing regimes. Lots of premises you may see have implemented a one-way system, a one-way in, one-way out, so that customers and staff don't come into conflict with one another or cross paths because of the purported infection risk. You'll have seen that many pubs are using app-based systems. The smaller premises don't tend to be doing that because there is a fairly significant cost implication for app-based systems, but our preference is for app-based because it means that people then don't have to go to the bar to get a drink. They can order their drink remotely and then be served by way of waiter-waitress service in the same way that they can obtain food in that same place. In many premises, staff PPE is optional. As an authority, we support the principle of the staff wearing masks, but we do recognise the challenges surrounding that. But let's not forget that we are in a pandemic and it's about infection control, protecting staff and customers that may attend. And obviously there's the age-old problem of alcohol consumption and compliance with social distancing, in the same way that one or two customers may partake in a little bit too much alcohol. Sometimes it's difficult to get them to adhere to the requirements of social distancing and to behave more widely, which is why we have issues with antisocial behaviour, nuisance and noise. And obviously associated with that, there is a risk in relation to transmission, but we're trying to work with licensed premises to educate them and guide them and advise them, and in some instances issue warnings where they're not adhering to the various requirements, because at the end of the day it's about trying to limit the risk of transmission and trying to keep customers, businesses and staff safe and businesses operational. I'm going to give you a quick example of where we worked with a premises and where there was a suggestion that a customer had gone into a premises, had some alcohol and then went away, and the next day came back presenting a positive COVID-19 test. Fortunately, we have an out-of-hours service that's operational, that's staffed by environmental health officers, and unfortunately on that day it was my turn to take the call, where we had the call that the licensed premises was experiencing some difficulties since this customer had presented with a positive COVID-19 test. Credit to the premises, they'd had fairly significant intervention with me because of other problems associated with the control and management of the site and compliance with COVID-19 requirements, but they had really stepped up. We were able to identify the individual with whom he had attended the premises, where he'd sat, the times that he'd sat there and where he'd been previously, and we were able to share that information with Public Health England and other parties involved in track and trace and trying to manage any potential outbreak very quickly and very effectively. We haven't always been entirely successful with that, and it's been a process of learning, and you and your colleagues will obviously be aware of a larger outbreak of COVID-19 in another licensed premises. What I would say in relation to that premises, I'm not going to name it in this presentation today, is we're continuing to work with a range of premises where there are challenges in terms of COVID-19 compliance, track and trace, and supporting them, as well as looking at more punitive measures to get them to comply with the different requirements. What I would say is that environmental health's role within the context of COVID-19 is definitely evolving. We have secured £75,000 funding from West Sussex County Council, which will help us pay for education campaigns, staffing and so on. And you may well have heard of the COVID-19 marshals that have been mooted of late by central government, i.e. individuals that will be going around to help enforce COVID-19 requirements. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like at the moment, and we're not sure what, if any, enforcement powers those marshals will have. So we'll wait with excitement to see how that evolves. But primarily our role is that of advice, enforcement, and trying to guide people, because at the end of the day we want safe, well managed and thriving businesses, and it is a particularly challenging time for licensed premises. But I also want to reassure the committee that where we have a non-compliant premises or individual, we will take robust action, and we have taken robust action, working in conjunction with our colleagues from the Police Service, HMRC, also in conjunction with Public Health England. And the intelligence and information relating to those non-compliant individuals and premises has been shared through those different information sharing groups that I referred you to at the beginning of the presentation. I thought it would be helpful to give you a bit of an overview about Licensing Act compliance during COVID-19. I've given you a couple of examples of premises where one has been very successful in securing data and information in relation to people attending the premises, and another not quite so successful, but coming back on board following significant intervention and guidance. We held a Teams call, a video call with a number of premises from the licensed trade to share best practice, to answer any questions and queries that they had, and to calm them, because there were lots of concerns prior to the reopening of such in July. We have maintained ongoing dialogue via social media and email, and we'll be looking to fully reintroduce pub watch meetings hopefully in the next month or so, subject to social distancing, subject to technology being available to some people, and it may be that we do that via Teams again, but we had extremely positive feedback there. The last meeting we had economic development on the call, Sussex Police, so it was a truly partnership approach. We have had some issues with licensed drivers not complying with quarantine periods. That relates to drivers who have been abroad on holiday and who are required to adhere to a 14-day quarantine period, self-isolation period thereafter. And we've had information from the trade about particular individuals who have not complied. As a result of that, we've taken fairly robust action against those individual drivers. I can't talk about that in any more detail at this stage because that's subject to an ongoing investigation in conjunction with Sussex Police and the border control. But I am reassured that other drivers are feeding that information back to us as responsible, fit and proper persons. And we are continuing to educate operators as well about when drivers may come back into the country having been away. They need to inquire as to where they've been and then put their own systems in place about ensuring that individual is not permitted to work for the prescribed 14 days. And generally we've had positive feedback in relation to that. Linking in again, we've offered advice and guidance to a range of businesses regarding when they can hold events, what events they can hold, the supply of alcohol, provision of food and entertainment. As you may well be aware, nightclubs in the traditional sense are not permitted to open at this time. Entertainment has to be carefully managed so as not to allow cheering, singing, dancing, chanting because of the airborne nature of COVID-19. Queries regarding social distancing and a misunderstanding of the 2 metre versus 1 metre plus and what needs to be put in place in terms of risk mitigation. Risk mitigation can comprise of face masks, gloves, hand washing facilities, hand sanitizer and plastic protective screens. And you may have seen a number of pubs that have put protective screens up at the bar to shield both staff and customers approaching that area. Risk assessments, as I said, lots of licensees aren't familiar with the concept of a risk assessment, particularly not in relation to a pandemic. So we've given lots of advice and guidance in relation to that. What ifs? What happens if a member of my staff comes to my premises and says I'm not feeling well or appears to be presenting with the symptoms of COVID-19? Again, we've given lots of guidance and advice about what to do there. And in the same way, if a customer presents as subsequently having COVID-19, the mechanisms they need to be putting in place, the controls, the deep cleans, the advice and the guidance and the reassurance. What we have been doing where we have had instances of customers, for example, and staff presenting with COVID-19 symptoms and or where there's been a positive test, is we've worked collaboratively with that premises to look at key messages that need to be conveyed to those people that attended the premises, but also to reassure that we are working in partnership with those premises to ensure that standards are adhered to and that measures are followed to limit further infection risk. as I've mentioned previously, there have been issues with regard to noise and disturbance from licensed premises. I think members of the public living in quite close proximity to licensed premises have got used to the quiet time between March and the end of June. And as pubs have reopened again, admittedly in different ways and in different forms from July, we are getting an increasing amount of noise and disturbance complaints. But on the flip side of things, there's a lot of whistleblowing, which actually I'm really reassured by that. And by whistleblowing, I mean other premises letting me know, or wider environmental health know, where a neighbouring premises or a licensee or a licensed driver is not complying with the terms of COVID-19, is not managing their premises responsibly, and is potentially an infection risk. And for ease of reference, I've put a link at the bottom of this slide to try and help businesses to guide them about the business reporting process if they have a problem with an individual who is presenting with the symptoms of COVID-19, staff or customer, and what they need to do. That guidance is quite thorough and quite helpful. And I think that has evolved as a result of feedback through Public Health England and through the NHS track and trace system, which perhaps at the beginning wasn't as effective as it could have been, but it's much better now. And I just thought, rather than trying to bore you, I thought it would be helpful for you just to have a snapshot about some of the things that we're kind of dealing with from environmental health. Lots of inquiries April and May in relation to COVID related calls, and that's businesses asking what they need to do to try and survive, how they can diversify, what do I do if scenarios. And as premises reopen, again, the demand for COVID related advice and guidance or complaints had continued into June and July. You'll notice that in terms of 008, that's our out of hours service, extremely busy in July and August for the reasons that I've outlined, that when the pubs were reopening, largely down to noise, largely down to social distancing, complaints that premises weren't necessarily following track and trace, and advice and guidance again. And another point that I raised, because I think it's been a point that's come to us from members, is the prevalence of bonfires and the complaints that we've been having in relation to bonfires. In March, we didn't deal with bonfires. That was dealt with by our nuisance and antisocial behaviour team. But you'll note in April, May, June and July, there's been a fairly high incidence of that. And we think that's as a result of, again, the amenity tip being closed or being restricted in terms of what it will take, and people choosing to burn items probably that they shouldn't burn in their back gardens. And in fact, in relation to Crawley Homes premises, tenants are not allowed to have bonfires. That represents a breach of their tenancy. And you'll note that I've put an asterisk at the bottom there, which I've talked about previously, about the increase in fly tipping. And we do have a targeted strategy planned in relation to that, and that's ongoing. Okay, and I thought it would be fair to kind of advise you what we've been doing from a taxi and licensing point of view. I'm incredibly proud of the licensing and taxi service. The teams there have adapted overnight and are absolutely passionate to keep businesses and drivers operational. In some ways, our systems were paper heavy before the onset of COVID-19, and we've adapted to online and remote working solutions, which we may continue with going forward. There's some statistics there about how many things we've dealt with, a significant number of renewals, which has enabled businesses, individual drivers and operators to continue to trade, albeit within a reduced environment because of the restrictions of COVID-19. You'll see that I've put an asterisk next to the sum of 29 for our new applicants. Many of our new applicants are unable to proceed with their licensing application because they can't fulfil parts of the licensing process, particularly, for example, the knowledge test or the driving test, because at this time, as the licensing manager, I'm not satisfied that we can safely accommodate drivers in terms of social distancing in a suitable environment as yet in the town hall, and they certainly won't be in a position to do a driving test, which forms part of the application process until we've worked out a better system of supply with our individual who does those kinds of tests. You'll see lots of DBS checks still going on to make sure people are fit and proper, and a high number of other checks, including medicals, DVLA checks to see if anyone's received any points or been penalised in any other way, checking insurance and certificates of compliance. And most recently in August, we have reintroduced vehicle checks, which has enabled people to change their vehicles, bring vehicles back into the trade, because a number of people chose to sawn their vehicle during lockdown because they were unable to operate or work, but that was their business choice. But we've tried to facilitate the reintroduction of vehicles as much as possible. So what are the current and emerging issues that we're currently facing as a service? You may or may not be aware that there's a current age limit on the age of vehicles that we will allow into the fleet, or the duration that they can stay in the trade. They can stay in the trade until they're 11 years old. We always let individual proprietors know that their vehicle is coming up to its age limit at least a year ahead, to give them opportunities to make provision for an alternative visit and to save or make financial arrangements for that alternative vehicle. We've had a lot of requests to extend the 11-year plus age limit of licensed vehicles in the wake of the pandemic, with people citing that they can't afford to replace a vehicle. In the first instance, I've taken the pragmatic view that where the vehicle is mechanically fit, is safe, we will extend for a period of 3 months to allow the person to make an alternative provision for a new vehicle. You will have also been aware of the licensed vehicle safety screens. We were consulted by the trade about concerns regarding transmission in relation to COVID-19, and many sought to install safety screens in their vehicles. Some of the proposals that I saw for safety screens, and by safety screens I mean a screen in between the driver and the passenger at the back, were very creative and included things like tarpaulin, shower curtains and so on. So we wrote a policy specifying the form and nature of the safety screen, because obviously we needed to make sure A, that it was safe, B, that it wasn't going to cause an issue in the event of an accident, and that safety features within a vehicle could be safely deployed, and also that it could be properly cleaned, because obviously after every single hiring, that screen and the surrounds and the touch points in the vehicle need to be cleaned. We've only had three individuals install those screens, which is an interesting point, because I anticipated that we would literally have most of the fleet doing that. We've talked previously about fee recovery. Fee recovery in relation to taxis and licensing more generally is still an ongoing issue. There was a deferral agreement for fees over a period of time during lockdown. That period is now ended and we are recovering fees. Just so that members are aware, licensing and taxi licensing are self-financing services. So if we don't recover the fees, it poses us a challenge in terms of being able to deliver a full and effective service. Members may have also heard of the concept of cross-border hiring. That is a legislative, try and say that with my teeth in, legislative, not a local issue, insofar as cross-border hiring allows providing a vehicle and a driver and an operator are all licensed by the same authority, they can operate pretty much anywhere that they want to. So theoretically, if I had an operator license issued from, say, Hastings, and I was a licensed driver, say, from Hastings, and had a vehicle license by Hastings, providing the booking mechanism is in place and the booking has been legitimately taken and allocated by that Hastings operator to a Hastings driver and Hastings vehicle, they could potentially come and work in Crawley. It's a source of much frustration amongst licensing authorities, as we would prefer to have our own vehicles, Crawley licensed drivers and Crawley operators in our borough, and we have been lobbying central government in relation to that, and I anticipate that you and your members will be lobbied about that too. You may have also heard about Uber and other app-based operators in the borough. We've been carrying out an investigation into various complaints associated with that, and that investigation has concluded with no apparent concerns from a legal perspective. And I can answer questions in relation to that if it's of assistance later on, but I may have to stop some of the questions because there are legal cases running at the moment, Chair. You and your members may be aware of the introduction of statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards. Obviously, the powers that be didn't think we had anything going on during lockdown and weren't remotely busy, and this landed on our desks mid-July, which relates to minimum standards amongst the taxi and private hire vehicle fleet and drivers as well. But I am quite proud to say that Crawley is already pretty much there with those statutory standards and beyond. But there will be a need going forward for our taxi and licensing private hire policy specific to Crawley to be amended in line with those standards. And one such thing relates to, for example, 6-month DBS checks and driver standards. but we have a plan in relation to that, but I'll bring that back to you and your members accordingly in due course. Licensing Act and more broad licensing issues. What's new and what are the challenges? Well, as if we're not busy enough, it's quite an exciting time. You and your members will probably be aware of the Business and Planning Act. That legislation came in as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and sought to relax controls surrounding the off sales of alcohol and to allow businesses to operate more freely. Pavement licences for outside areas, that's been adopted by the council as well. And we're receiving a number of applications from licensed premises that are looking to diversify and use different areas that are not previously licensed to provide seating and associated accommodation for people outside of the premises, because obviously with social distancing, the number of people that can be accommodated safely in a premises is significantly reduced. So the pavement licence strategy, the off-licence relaxation, means that a number of people can be seated outside of a premises and served to help support that business and their operation. As an authority, and in fact Sussex-wide, we recognise the challenges faced by businesses at this difficult time during the pandemic, and a decision was taken corporately that we would offer that service free of charge. At the moment we've had 3 applications, which I thought we would have far more, for pavement licences, and those are currently out to consultation. One is operational. That legislation is applicable to the 30th of September 2021, but in relation to pavement licences, we've taken a decision here in Crawley. Rather than letting it run till that period, we're going to issue those licences for 6 months in the first instance to assess the impact on people living in the locality, because obviously a greater number of people outside means greater noise, greater nuisance, greater disturbance. In the same way as we're monitoring carefully who's availing themselves of the off-sales relaxation and how they're managing to do that, because technically they should notify us as the licensing of the authority of their intention to avail themselves of that provision. As I've said and alluded to previously, lots of premises are struggling to survive with the lower capacity, hence the reason why the government made relaxations in relation to pavement licences and other concessions. We've had a high number of variation applications, premises looking to change their mode of operation, premises looking to change their hours, and applications to relax conditions. Some of the conditions that the premises are seeking to relax are, in our view, undermining the licensing objectives, and we are receiving objections from Sussex Police and the Public Health Authority as well. For example, conditions relating to the provision of SIA staff, door staff. And that's obviously a high cost implication, but in the current economic climate, businesses struggling to pay those fees and charges associated with that service. But by the same token, door staff and other controls are fundamental in assisting track and trace, controlling admissions, and ensuring a premises doesn't get over capacity. As I've already mentioned as well, the issue of impact on local residents, noise nuisance, but it's about re-educating those local residents that, you know, you've had a bit of a quiet period, but the licensed premises are not as busy as they have been. They're not allowed to operate effectively as a nightclub and have music banging out as such, and not allowed to have dancing. But again, it's about working collaboratively with local residents to reassure them that we will investigate complaints and we will carry out work with the licensed premises and indeed legal action if needed to tackle those issues of noise nuisance and licence condition non-compliance. And what are the future considerations for the committee? Our street trading policy is somewhat dated and needs to incorporate new areas of Crawley. Street trading is where a person wishes to sell articles from a unit on the street. As I've mentioned previously, the national statutory taxi standards alongside our own licensing policy will require a review, and that's likely to come to the next licensing committee, I would imagine. You'll be aware that members previously dealt with vehicle emissions and made some decisions about vehicle emissions relating to our taxi and private hire fleet, our Hackney carriage and private hire fleet. We have had some feedback in relation to that, and there may need to be a review given the pandemic and a new approach considered. And we may also look at introducing an animal welfare policy. For those members of you who have not been part of the licensing committee previously, we are also authorised officers under the Animal Welfare Act, and we work in conjunction with the RSPCA and Sussex Police and inspect various animal licence settings that we have within the borough. Of course, this is amidst a background of ongoing legislative change, constant changes in terms of guidance, parameters set in relation to COVID-19, the B word, Brexit, businesses diversifying, changing their mode of operation, other public health matters, including COVID-19. So I don't think from a licensing or indeed environmental health point of view, this will we will ever be a quiet service. It's nice and varied, it's exciting, it's interesting. But at the end of the day, the primary purpose of the taxi regime is for public safety. And we want to see thriving, safe, well-managed businesses across the borough. But again, as I've said previously, where businesses are non-compliant, we'll work with them, we'll educate, we'll advise, but we'll also look to take legal action as is needed. Okay, and that's the end of the presentation, Chair. I don't know whether this is an appropriate juncture at which for you and your colleagues to ask any questions that you may have.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Corinne. I'm sure it is. We've been joined, or we were joined just before you started by Councillor Mullins, and so Councillor Mullins, welcome belatedly. I just have to check your disclosures of interest in the minutes. Can you confirm the ward you represent, Councillor Mullins, if you have any declarations of interest to make, and if you agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on the 20th of January 2020? Thank you.
Yes, I agree with the minutes. I've got nothing really of interest to declare, and I represent Gossip Green and Broadfield North, East.
East, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Mullins. That's great. The process for discussion at this meeting, councillors, will be as follows. Any committee member wishing to speak should turn on their camera. This will signify to the Democratic Services Officer your request to speak, and I can assure you that Heather is keeping an assiduous note on who indicates when. You will then be invited to speak one by one. When you are called on to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute your microphone, and check that your screen is surrounded by a red box before speaking. Remember to pause for 3 seconds to allow for the time delay, and please turn off your camera and microphone when you are finished and are no longer live. And officers will respond to any queries raised after each committee member has spoken. So we'll make a start. So please turn on your camera if you wish to.
Lovely, thank you. And we'll start with Councillor McCarthy, please.
Okay, microphone on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Right. Okay, hopefully we should be live. In the guidance for the COVID secure venues, I've seen reports on social media that female patrons to pubs are reluctant to write their details down on paper that's available for the next people to read. So I would like to suggest within our guidance that we suggest that personal details are recorded on a piece of paper, which is folded and posted in the slot of a sealed container. That would be my first suggestion. The other one, you mentioned there's been quite a lot of instances of fly tipping. I think you mentioned 69 instances of fly tipping. That seems to have been a problem in my area, in Poundhill North, and particularly on Grattans and Peterhouse Parade, as well as near Milton Mount Flats. So as this, does this change our focus on whether we're going to sort of look at a CCTV solution to catch offenders who are fly tipping in the borough?
Okay. Corinne, do you want me to bring you back in?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If I may answer that, I absolutely take your point in relation to the confidentiality of details, and we are working with businesses to ensure that information isn't just kept on scraps of paper. It's kept confidential and carefully managed, but absolutely we can incorporate that suggestion. Thank you very much into the guidance and the Keep Crawley COVID secure requirements, certainly. Would you like me to address the second point, Chair, now? In relation to fly tipping, yes, it's an ongoing problem. There are a range of strategies that we are looking at with our community services, wider community services team, our fraud team, and our community wardens to manage that. And we have used CCTV, we have used stills that have been provided in other parts of the borough. For example, Manor Royal suffers quite badly with fly tipping as well. And I'd like to advise that we have issued fixed penalty notices to individuals that have been identified as fly tipping and carried out formal interviews with them. But we have an ongoing plan and strategy in relation to that. Yes.
Okay. Kate, I see you've got your camera on. Do you want to come in for that one as well? Okay. Go ahead, you're live.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, just to add to that, there's actually quite an exciting campaign that's being considered at the moment that's called the Scrap campaign, which is based on the Hertfordshire model, which is very much a West Sussex County Council, districts and boroughs and other key stakeholders coming together to work collaboratively on fly tipping issues. So it would include the Police Crime Commissioner's Office around rural crime, obviously Sussex Police, National Farmers Union, interestingly as well, but Hertfordshire have had huge success. So that's being driven through the West Sussex Waste group. So we should be able to bring some more information back to you at a future meeting. But I think that does look quite exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Councillor Burgess, please.
Thank you. It's not really a question to begin with. First of all, hang on. I'd like to express a thank you and a well done to all the people that are involved in the community hub for their sterling work. And perhaps, Chair, we could minute our thanks because I think they've done a fantastic effort in what they did. I think thank you. And it doesn't seem enough to say that, but I think they did an amazing job and thank you. And the only question I've got, I can wait till later.
Yeah, I'll just come in there. I fully agree with you, Councillor Burgess. I think it's abundantly clear that our licensing team has clearly been working incredibly hard. And there's some, you can just see from those slides, there's just this sheer extent of the challenges. And I think, you know, we really do want to record that. I hope no one on the committee will disagree, but I do think we want to record our sincere thanks. You know, in very difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gydra, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in and echo those comments. Some of you will know the previous job that I had, I was very much frontline as well, and I saw firsthand the level of work that was being done in terms of the hub, in terms of the support during COVID, the crisis, the homeless street community, how they were supported, all of the, I mean, picking up the phone, hearing harrowing stories, and so I know exactly how stressful and tiring the gargantuan effort that was put in, and certainly in terms of Crawley Borough Council staff, the initial hiccups that had to be resolved, and they were resolved quite clearly very well by the staff, because if they were given, you know, a best practice, a kind of nod to say this is the way to do things, I don't think we can applaud them enough, really, to be honest with you. So thank you, every single one of you.
Okay, bear with me. We've just got, it's taken a while. Councillor Mullins, you're now live. Thank you.
Thank you. I will obviously reiterate all those things about the team during this crisis. I mean, it's been an excellent effort, and you know, I would echo those thanks. On the fly tipping and that sort of thing, I'm getting very concerned about how long it's taking to get the tip open again, because I've had people coming to me, ringing me up saying, well, only yesterday I had a chap who said, I need to tip stuff. And I say, well, the only place you can do is either go to Burgess Hill, Haywards or Horsham. But Horsham is one of the most unfriendly tips I've ever been to. They won't allow you to take a trailer in there. and the people are quite unfriendly, I find, when I've been there. And there's a lot of people who've got trailers who take garden waste themselves and want to dispose of it, and they can't do that. So it seems to be taking an extraordinary amount of time to get that tip open. And I wondered what's going on. Is this some sort of county council experiment to see if Crawley can do without a tip, or is it genuinely closed because they still got repairing?
This is getting quite ridiculous, I have to say.
No, Councillor Crowe, hold on. First of all, I'm going to declare an interest, as a personal interest, non-prejudicial interest, as a member of West Sussex County Council. I don't actually think there was anything, even though you've expressed your displeasure, Councillor Crowe, I don't think there's anything unfair in what Councillor Mullins has just said. There is a concern. Clearly, the amenity tip at County Oak in Crawley was closed for the. Have I gone quiet?
No, you've gone better.
Oh, sorry. Oh, good. Right. Clearly, there was the issue that obviously inevitably all the tips had to be closed, and we've had the unfortunate situation with the tip in Crawley that there was a serious fire which has closed it for some considerable time now, and my understanding is it's going to be at least until the end of September. I think one of the things that concerns me is actually this is the second serious fire at the County Oak community tip in not too long a time, and I do hope the County Council will be addressing that. I think it's fair to observe though that if these things aren't available, that the fact that fly tipping, we've been told, has gone up significantly during the lockdown period and up till now, is something that we need to be taking seriously. And as such, I think Councillor Mullins's comments are fair and well founded. But clearly, every committee member is going to be entitled to their own view on that. So,
Mr. Chair, can I come in on that?
I would rather take unless I mean, Councillor Mrs. Burgess and Councillor Gardner, is it on this particular issue?
Chair,
okay. In that case, Chair, Kevin, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until they've spoken.
Chair, I was just going to suggest that as the Deputy Chair and to support you, I was just going to suggest that we try and not mention politics at all, but just work as a team, because this obviously the fire was a fire. It happened. We don't know why. We don't know how long it's going to take to be up and running. I think we are directing people to the nearest sites for their use, and we'll have it up and running as soon as we can, Chair. So my advice, as the Deputy Chair, to support you as a Chair, I suggest that we perhaps try not to get political. That's all my saying. Thank you.
Well, it's noted, Councillor Burgess. I just don't think politics has actually intervened. I don't think anyone's. But let's move on to Councillor Gardner.
I agree.
Hello. Well, I think, and far be it from me to speak for Councillor Crowe, but I think his reaction was more to do with the comment to the idea that there's a conspiracy theory that they're testing to see how long we can go without our tip. I think the answer is we're well past that point. I mean, I'll raise the matter. I was in one of the local charity shops the day before yesterday or yesterday. Time flies, and they are having a big problem with proper fly tipping around the back of the two charity furniture shops on the Broadway. Significant. I've got significant amounts of stuff behind there: beds, furniture, rubbish, brick rubble blocking the door, and they're having an absolute crisis at the moment because that's a place where people can drive around the back, dump stuff, and drive off. So let's be honest, there is a problem. In terms of how long it's going to take to fix it, I think the biggest problem is that the roof on that structure is extremely big, but it's made of metal, isn't it? So, I mean, when it gets hot, it changes strength and buckles, and clearly, if they could reopen it with all the stress that's it's causing, I think they would. But we also have to remember that a lot of the reason it was closed in the first place was COVID, and the social distancing and all those issues and the problems that the staff were facing with people getting upset, being told they couldn't bring a trailer or they couldn't bring this, or they couldn't bring that. And I mean, I'm sure I read comments in the past over the last few months, fair comments, about what you can versus what you can't bring to the tip. And when you've loaded a car up full of stuff and you're told half of it's not allowed, people tend to get quite upset by that. So trying to take the heat out of this discussion a bit, I think the county would very much like to reopen the tip. I'm pretty sure, based on my experience at Burgess Hill, who were also quite abrupt with me, that the other tips around the area are getting quite stressed out, having to deal with the massive increase in stuff coming their way. So anyway, that was my comment.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor McCarthy, I think.
Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted to say that I'm not a county councillor, so I don't just jump to the defence of county on issues like this. But I just don't agree with the statement that with the victims of some sort of social experiment being done by county council to see how long we can do without a tip. There was a fire. There was damaged cars. It's been repaired. It will be back online as soon as possible. There's no conspiracy theory. There's nothing underhanded coming from county. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's fair enough, Councillor McCarthy. I'm afraid when I listened to what Councillor Mullins was saying, I didn't get the impression he was, with that particular comment, he was being particularly serious. But Councillor Mullins, correct me if I'm wrong, but I doubt you will. Shall we move on to? Does anyone else have any other points they'd like to make? Or I'm not sure. There's a lot there for you to respond to. To be honest, Corinne, you've set out what the fly tipping issue is. And
Okay.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Yes. Okay. Next.
Councillor Johans, please.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd move on to something a bit more positive. Just want to say thank you, Corinne, for such a comprehensive presentation. That was really useful. And just to say a real massive thank you to all the staff that were involved in the Help Hub. I think it was your very first slide where you talked about how brilliant they were and how other boroughs were asking how we've done it and asking for assistance from us. And I think that's a real good news story, and I think that's something we should all be really proud of, and be proud of the staff who are involved in that to make sure that the most vulnerable people in the town were looked after. And I think that's just massive testament to all of you guys, really. And I just thought I'd give you the opportunity to maybe share a bit more about that and the best practices involved in it, and how was it that we were so successful with it, especially with, obviously there's some staff who are probably redeployed into some of these areas, not really used to this. So I just wanted just curious to know a bit more about that, and hopefully other committee members might like to hear about it too.
Thank you, and many thanks for your thanks. I'll convey that to the various teams that were involved. I know that it was quite a challenging and rather exhausting process. We worked collaboratively with a large supermarket, Aldi, who help us to source certain foodstuffs and prepare the packages. We worked in conjunction with other local businesses who donated foodstuffs, fresh fruit, vegetables, and so on. And the teams basically pulled out all the stops to respond to the town's most vulnerable residents, and worked together to develop those boxes. We had a network of pickers and packers who packed items into a box with certain requirements of the individual concerned. We had a series of people who were used to using their vehicle for other purposes, but they were then the dispatch drivers who dropped it off to the people who were often housebound or considered to be vulnerable. We worked collaboratively with the NHS in terms of people that needed urgent medical supplies who couldn't get out and about to get medical supplies. We had a medical dispatch driver as well who would go around the different pharmacies and collect prescriptions for people and then deliver them. The Help Hub itself at the Town Hall acted as a triage service and made sure that the right people were getting the right help at the right time and in a timely manner. We had a target to get the food boxes, for example, out at the very latest the next day on the request being made. But I'm very proud to say that with a hard-working team consisting of a whole range of individuals across the council with varying skill sets, we often fulfilled the need for that food box on the same day. And also we responded to people's particular dietary needs or specific requirements. And sometimes for the community hub based at the town hall, it was about that person having someone to talk to. A series of welfare chat calls being undertaken to some of our most vulnerable residents who didn't have family members, just to make sure they were okay and make sure they weren't in need. So a whole raft of different things, and some very tenacious and determined staff to make it happen in a quick and timely manner to respond to those very acute needs in some instances. But also taking time and showing a bit of kindness and compassion to often those vulnerable people who hadn't seen someone for some considerable time. Obviously, with appropriate PPE and in social distancing measures in place, we would engage with those individuals, see how they were. And on occasion, I can give you one particular example where an individual had phoned in, his needs were identified via the Help Hub and triaged to the hub distribution point for food and medical supplies. And one of the staff members that was distributing the supplies couldn't get a response at the door. And all staff had had a training that if you can't get a response, that's a problem. The people that we're dealing with are housebound generally. If there's a problem, call it in. He didn't give up on the basis of the training that I'd given and kept knocking, and then happened to notice that a curtain moved in a lounge. And actually what had happened is the gentleman in there had fallen and had actually broken his hip. And we were told by the ambulance service that had our staff member not been so determined and been so observant, it's possible that that individual may not have still been with us. And because of the quick thinking behaviour of that member of staff, that person's life, was potentially saved, and they received the medical treatment. Ambulance was called, the home was broken into, and the gentleman taken into a hospital setting. So there was a whole raft of different skill sets that were brought in. And, for some of our staff, it was a big steep learning curve where they're not used to doing certain types of work. But I have to say I'm very proud. And, the service can be ramped up again should the need arise. But it's also down to other community-based businesses, other organisations and charities that we worked with who also helped us source and supply items for distribution to the most vulnerable, and also took on some of that responsibility and continue to do so in today, where those a core group of individuals who are vulnerable have still been identified. Some services are being still supplied to them in different ways, shapes and forms, but it's something that I'm absolutely passionate about. More widely, environmental health, who led from the front, again in that regard, passionate about, and that's kind of where we are. I hope that kind of gives you a very, probably lengthy, but passionate overview of how the Help Hub at K2 and the Community Help Hub at Town Hall, triaging the services, actually went about it. And we do it again if called upon to do so. And that was in addition to our day jobs as well, most of us in environmental health, certainly.
Thank you so much. I think that's just human compassion at its finest, really. Everybody stepped up to the plate and, as you said, went above and beyond.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay. We've got Councillor Jaggard next.
Thank you. Yes, I would really like to add my thanks to those that have already been given, Corinne, for the very in-depth, informative presentation. And it really just shows the huge range of skills and knowledge and energy that the environmental health and licensing team have. You don't really think about it, but the amazing different things that you need to know is astonishing, and then all the new things coming forward, the street trading, the animal welfare as well, which you don't usually even consider as part of it. So an amazing team, so thank you very much for tonight and for all that you're doing. Thanks.
Many thanks. I really appreciate the positive feedback, but I am also here to answer any questions that you might have as well. Councillor Hart, you're now live.
Thank you. Sorry, Corinne, I really don't have a question other than, again, I would like to say thank you very much for all the work that you've done, all you and your team have done, and for the presentation tonight. It's been really informative, and although I think we thought you were all busy, we've now appreciated and learnt just how busy. And thank you to you and all your teams.
Thank you very much again for the feedback.
Councillor Burgess.
Hello, thank you. I've got some, they're quite simple questions, so forgive me if they're too simple. About the signing in, what happens if people sign in a silly name, as some people do? And obviously not everyone's got apps, so I can understand and we have to sign in. But the marshals, you said that we don't know yet what powers they have, but who are going to be these marshals? Is it going to be a separate post that we advertise? Is it going to be voluntary? Is it paid? And who picks up the bill anyway? And the last one I had was, about our taxi drivers. Do we know if any of our taxi drivers work in other authorities, as the other authorities sometimes work in hours? That was it, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. For the first point in relation to the track and trace details, you're absolutely right. I think there have been a fair few Mickey Mouses and Donald Ducks that have registered as part of track and trace. In those instances, licensed premises are recommended to refuse access to that person. But there are people who will make up fictitious names and fictitious phone numbers and emails, and there's only so much that the licensed premises can do. But the advice that we're giving is, if in doubt, don't let them in. That's the first point. I'm sorry, could you refresh my memory as to the next question?
Yes, it was about the marshals. How are we going to appoint these? Who are they going to be? Are they going to be voluntary, paid, or? That's
the issue of the COVID marshals, as has been referred, was something that has been mooted by the Prime Minister in very recent days. We're not entirely sure what that role will involve, or indeed any associated enforcement powers. It's been mooted that there will be a database of retired environmental health officers and other enforcement officers that could be drawn on to facilitate such a role, but there's nothing been formalised as yet, and we heard about it at the beginning of the week. But as I said in my presentation, we did receive some funding from West Sussex County Council, £75,000, that will be looking to invest in staff, projects, education and advice. But again, the role of the marshals is a little unclear at this juncture, and we wait with excitement and caution as to what that might involve.
Okay. And the other one was, do you know any of our taxi drivers work in other authorities occasionally?
Absolutely. There's a lot of cross-border hiring. There's a lot of taxi drivers, private hire drivers, and indeed hackney carriage drivers who work in different authority areas and wait for dispatch at different points across the Sussex borough and beyond, so the Sussex County and beyond. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was it. Thank you, Chair.
With Councillor Miller-Smith.
Thank you. I'll add my thanks as well. Obviously, it was, first of all, a very comprehensive report and update for us, which is great to see and very informative. And obviously, you guys, I'm really pleased, particularly to see that you're, working the best you can on enforcement and working with our licensable activities to help people to try and get to grips with it. So thank you very much. I had a specific question about, I can't remember, there was so much information coming through, so my apologies if you said this, but the screens for taxis, was that something that they had to pay for it, or were we somehow offering to help and pay for that? You mentioned about screens for taxis.
Yes.
And not very many have taken it up.
Yeah, that was it's a voluntary scheme that the taxi driver, we suggested it in conjunction with some feedback that we'd had from taxi drivers. The cost is nominal in relation to installation, and many of the screens are removable. So if and when we come out of the pandemic, or they can be removed, but the costs were largely met by the taxi drivers themselves. Because it's associated with the business and the vehicle, it was a tax deductible item. But yes, we didn't have, it wasn't a funded option by the authority, and it's voluntary. And unfortunately, some vehicles, by virtue of their design, would not be suitable to have screens of that nature put in place. And the other point is that with a screen in place, it potentially reduces the occupant capacity of a licensed vehicle insofar as the number of passengers that could be transported. So the authority didn't reduce the occupancy level of those vehicles that have had the screens put in, but left it to the driver, who we consider to be a responsible, fit and proper person to make their own decisions about where they wanted their passengers to sit. I had one driver that did ask if the passenger could sit next to him, and I said, well, what's the point in having the screen there if you're going to have someone sitting right next to you? But again, it's the responsibility of the particular licensed driver. We have had instances in the past where we've funded particular items such as CCTV, but in terms of the screens, that was a matter that was funded by individual drivers and or operators. And I know it's a strategy that the airport licensed private hire operators are looking at more widely as a set standard in any event. Because in some instances it provides us an additional safety mechanism, and in relation to COVID-19 limits transmission. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm guessing, unless anyone else appears up front, Councillor Guidra, yes.
Yeah, I just reappeared. Sorry about that. I've got a question for you. In light of COVID, hang on a minute, let me put some light on the subject here. In light of COVID, and obviously, you know, we all accept that we don't know what the future holds. Is it something that you might consider, you know, the taxis that they have in some other countries have a screen pre-installed? Would it be something you might sort of start to think about in terms of a process of requiring that, maybe going forwards? I do know that obviously the London taxis, the cabs, they have those things pre-built in. I know that wouldn't necessarily work for all, but we're in uncharted territory, you know. So I wonder it would be more COVID secure to have a taxi that had a screen between the driver and the passengers. And I just wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you very much. We've left the policy open. The policy does give guidance about the nature and form of the protective screen between the driver and the vehicle, and it can be adapted for each individual type of vehicle. So that's a flexible option. But yes, it could be potentially incorporated in the conditions and incorporated in any change in policy, that where somebody wishes to install a safety screen, or a protective screen rather than a safety screen, sorry, to create that physical barrier between a driver and the passenger, be it for infection transmission purposes in the case of COVID-19 or others. And of course we can consider that as an additional vehicle standard, but that condition would be potentially applied where that vehicle is fit for that to happen. But we'd need to have a look at the particular type of vehicle. There are some vehicles that do have the screen already. The larger TX vehicles, the larger vehicles, the multi-seater vehicles do have that. And some of the requirements of West Sussex County Council in terms of school runs is that there's a protective screen in between the child and the carer that's being transported and the taxi driver. And that's something that we can certainly look at more widely, and it's something we would liaise with you as the committee. But it's a voluntary option at the moment with certain parameters that we've set to ensure safety, you know, so that someone doesn't get hurt in the event of an accident, that safety mechanisms within a vehicle can be deployed, airbags and so on, without being interfered with if a screen's in situ. But certainly something as part of the wider strategy, yes.
I just to come back on that, I think it's important to just make people aware, because there are some people, more elderly people, who are very concerned about sharing a vehicle with somebody else. Certainly somebody that shares a vehicle with a lot of people. So you know, if there was a message to put out there, it would be to taxi firms and licensed hire vehicle firms, sorry, and taxis, not taxi firms, that there are options out there for people who wish to sit in a car that has a screen, if that helps them feel more secure. Yeah, I mean that's an important thing for me to know. That's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's something we can definitely keep under review. I'm not seeing any more councillors indicate they want to speak. If that's the case, I'd like to thank Corinne for the comprehensive report, and also I would just like to add the comment, and I hope I shall treat silence as evidence of this, but I hope the whole committee also welcomes, as I do, the Keep Crawley COVID-19 Secure campaign.
Yes.
I'm pleased to see this. I have to say that I have been approached a few times now by members of the public expressing concern to me that they'd been somewhere and they felt that all the things that they knew should be doing for the track and trace and so on and so forth wasn't perhaps been as enforced as rigorously as they'd have felt safe, or they'd have felt safer if it had. So I actually think this is a really useful and a really good thing that the council's actually doing. You certainly have my full support. I'm pretty sure that you'll have the support of all the councillors on Crawley Borough Council, not just the licensing committee, as part of the really good work the council's doing, keeping our residents safe. Because ultimately we want everyone to have fun, but the one thing we want to make sure as well is that if there is an outbreak, that we can make sure that everybody who needs it gets that testing. And I think as we've come in out of lockdown and we've started to try to live in what's, I suppose, could be fairly called the new normal, that there's always going to be challenges like this, but I think it's also very helpful that we as a council are there to offer firm but friendly guidance to all our businesses to ensure that the standards are being maintained. So thank you for that. All committee members have had the opportunity to speak. I will give one last opportunity if anyone does want to come in. No, it looks like everyone's content. So we'll move on to the recommendation. The committee's asked to note the update and request that the views expressed during the presentation and any actions are acknowledged and documented by the officers. As this is a procedural item, there will be no vote. Instead, I will move the recommendation. And can I invite the Vice Chair to second?
Yes, certainly. I'll second that. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Burgess. In which case, as we're not having I don't see a need for a vote on it. Hopefully, no one will disagree. The motion that is passed. The supplemental agenda, I'm advised there isn't one, but I would like to add that training for licensing subcommittees is currently being arranged for the new committee members. I'm sure the officers wouldn't object if some of the existing committee members would like a refresher, but please note, in particular, it's highly important that new members attend, as they can't serve on a licensing subcommittee without training or a refresher. Now, information has been circulated by the officers, so hopefully, can I say to licensing committee members, if you haven't done it, please get in touch with them. It's always important we have as large a pool of councillors for these licensing subcommittees as possible, not least of which because we like to avoid councillors who have, if there is a review and there needs to be a subcommittee, we try to avoid having councillors whose ward the premises actually are in, if we can help it. With the business of the licensing committee meeting concluded, I thank you all for your participation. I hope you agree with me that you think that it's actually been really useful information and really very helpful for us as committee members as part of our work. And so with that concluded, I'm going to declare the meeting closed at 20:28. Thank you all once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.